All right. Thanks, Josh. Hi, I'm Andrew, and I am also an engineer on the React team at Vercel. I've been working on React since 2016, and it was actually at that year's React Conf that I somehow tricked them into letting me join the team, so I'm happy to be here again. So let's talk about some more improvements in React 19. The first one we're going to talk about is React Actions. Actions originally landed in the Canary channel last summer, and you may have heard about them in the context of something called server actions, a feature available in server components frameworks like Next.js. But actions are not exclusive to server components frameworks. They also work on the client, even if you don't use a server framework at all. So, what are actions? Actions are a first-class pattern for asynchronously updating data in your application in response to user input. Actions as a general pattern are not a React invention. They've been part of the web platform for decades. In fact, when HTML form actions were first introduced to the web back in the 1900s, JavaScript had not yet been created yet, if you can believe it. Form actions were the way to add interactivity to your web page. And in recent years, there's been a resurgence of actions-inspired APIs within the JavaScript community, thanks in large part to Remix, a React framework, Remix. A React framework whose web-centric and form-centric design has been greatly influential in reintroducing actions as a pattern for server-client communication. Nowadays, it seems nearly every JavaScript web framework has their own take on the actions pattern, and for good reason. We think that actions are a fantastic way to build applications, and they fit perfectly into the React programming model. But if action-based APIs already exist in React frameworks, why are we building them into React? We think we can take actions even further by integrating them directly into React features like streaming SSR, selective hydration, suspense, and transitions, all while maintaining React's obsessive insistence on composability. Our goal is to provide a core primitive that frameworks like Remix, Next, and Redwood can build on top of, the same way they currently build on features like streaming and suspense. To understand how actions in React work, let's go back to the beginning and look at form actions in HTML. So in a classic HTML form, you specify a server endpoint by passing its URL to the action property. When the user submits the form, the data is sent to the server, and the server responds with a fresh HTML page. So submit form, load page, submit form, load page. It's pretty simple, right? And what's great about this model is that you can use it to build almost anything. So why don't we? Because I've seen a ton of web apps, and almost none of them are built this way. Nowadays, a web developer could go their entire career without ever using this API. And what happened is, upon the introduction of JavaScript, we all love JavaScript, if it eventually became possible to build client-heavy web apps that provided a much richer, more interactive experience than apps whose behavior was confined solely to the server. Today, when a user opens your app, they have certain baseline expectations. They expect instant feedback when interacting with the app. There's no time to wait for an entirely new HTML document every time you click. And they expect apps to remember their current state. So you shouldn't lose your scroll position or your text input whenever you perform an action. In other words, users expect more than what's possible to achieve without at least some client-side interactivity. Because of this rise in user expectations, code written for the web went from looking like this to looking more like this. And there are some nice things about client-side event handlers. They can be used to implement instant, rich feedback to user input, and they can compose client and server behavior together. However, they also have some downsides. Managing local state asynchronously is super hard and frequently leads to bugs like race conditions. And because event handlers rely on JavaScript, the UI is not interactive until the code loads and runs, which is slow compared to raw HTML and leads to dropped interactions. So it's tempting to revert back to plain HTML actions. They have a very simple reload everything model that is super forgiving to all your application code, whether it's good or whether it's maybe a little bit sloppy. And they don't rely on JS, so the app is interactive as soon as the HTML renders. But we shouldn't forget about the reasons we moved away from actions in the first place. They provide little to no immediate feedback in response to user input. You're basically just stuck with whatever the browser stock controls give you. And it's really difficult to sprinkle on additional client interactivity because it's an entirely different programming model. React exists to solve exactly this kind of riddle. We've done it over and over and over again. How do we combine the structure and simplicity of server-driven apps with the rich interactivity of client-side apps, all within the same unified, composable programming model? So, how do React Actions achieve this? React Actions are an evolution of two existing APIs. The first is React Transitions, a powerful feature for updating state without blocking user input, introduced in React 18. Actions build on transitions by adding support for asynchronous functions. And the second, of course, is the HTML form API. Using a React action is a lot like using an HTML form action, except instead of passing a URL to the action prop, you can now pass a function. And in the most basic example, that's all you have to do. Pass a function to the action prop, and when the user submits the form, the action is called. By using an action function instead of a URL, you can define the behavior of the action directly inside your component. And now notice there's nothing special about an action function. They're regular functions. You can compose them, you can write abstractions for them, the same way you would any other function. You can define the action on the client, or if you use a server component framework, you can define the action on the server via the use server directive and access your data layer directly. You can have any number of actions per page, per component, per whatever. You can swap out actions at runtime. And we can achieve this level of maximum composability because we've integrated actions into every layer of React, from the client runtime to the streaming SSR renderer to the server component's data format, all working together to provide a seamless experience. You'll notice that in addition to looking a lot like HTML actions, actions also look pretty similar to event handlers like onSubmit or onClick. By convention, we use the word action when naming actions and the prefix on or handle when naming event handlers. Despite the surface level similarities, though, actions have some important abilities that set them apart from regular event handlers. One such ability is support for progressive enhancement. Form actions in React are interactive before hydration occurs. And believe it or not, this works with all actions, not just actions defined on the server. If the user interacts with a client action before it is finished hydrating, React will queue the action and replay as soon as it streams in. If the user interacts with a server action, we can go one step further. It immediately triggers a regular browser navigation, just like a classic web form. No hydration or JavaScript required. Yeah. Another area where actions really shine is in their handling of asynchronous logic. React actions have built-in support for UX patterns like optimistic UI and error handling. These are essential to building delightful user experiences, but they're notoriously difficult to implement correctly due to their asynchronous nature. Actions make these complex UX patterns super simple by deeply integrating with React features like suspense and transitions. With new hooks like use optimistic, use form status, and use action state, you can start implementing these patterns with just a few lines of code. Later today, we'll get an in-depth look at how to use the new action APIs to improve your app's experience. I'm really excited about those, so stick around. So that's actions in React 19. They're effortlessly composable. They have a unified client and server API. They're interactive before hydration, and you can implement advanced UX in just a few lines of code. So before we wrap up the React 19 portion of the keynote, I want to cover one more topic. Fair warning, this has nothing to do with actions or anything else in the rest of the keynote, but I think it's worth mentioning. React 19 includes a couple of changes to the JSX runtime, and most of them are related to everyone's favorite React feature, refs. Boo! Oh, okay, let's just wait. Well, I'm happy to announce that in React 19, Ref is a prop. We did it! This took a lot of work. OK, so on the surface, this is maybe an unremarkable change. But it, in fact, fixes a complaint that people have had about React for a while. Because in past versions of React, ref was not a prop. It had special behavior in the runtime. You could pass a ref to a component as if it were a prop, but in the receiving component, the ref would not appear in the props object. And as many of you are well aware, this made it difficult to create abstractions and components that accept a ref, which is a bit absurd given that React, as we all know, is all about composition. The historical reasons for why React treated refs this way are pretty boring. It's related to something called class components. I don't know if you've heard about that. So a few years ago, to solve the problem, without breaking existing behavior, we introduced a workaround API called forward ref. Boo. So mission accomplished, I think. Look, we all know you hate forward ref. It's cumbersome to write, doesn't play that nicely with TypeScript, and it shows up everywhere in your component tree. It's also just a little bit offensive, right? Why is something that should be so simple so complicated? It was the best way we knew to solve the problem at the time without introducing a breaking change. But today, we are finally making that change. Ref is now a regular prop. It appears in the props object, and that means you never need to use forward ref again. All right, that's the end of the conference. I think we can just end it there now. To make this happen, we are removing some long-deprecated APIs, including string refs and the legacy context API. We've been warning about these for a while, so most of you are probably unaffected. If you do have an older code base, we publish an upgrade guide with advice on how to gradually upgrade your components. So those are just some of the features and improvements coming to React 19. There's a lot more that we did not cover, but you can read all about those updates on our blog. And speaking of our blog, a few weeks ago, we announced the React 19 beta with a call for library and framework authors to test it out in preparation for a stable release. And so far, the feedback on the beta has been pretty good. So as a result, today, we are upgrading the beta to an RC, release candidate. That's right. That means we think it's stable enough for you to start trying React 19 in your applications. And pending any last-minute feedback, we expect a stable release of React 19 within the next few weeks. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Joe to talk about what's coming next in React. Thank you.